The hawk circled overhead as Theodora Jenkins knelt in the dusty grass behind the boarding house, her calloused fingers closing around a single gray feather that had drifted down from somewhere unknown. She tucked it carefully into the worn leather satchel at her hip, where it joined perhaps 24 others she had collected over the past 3 months, all of different sizes and shades. Her plan was simple but necessary. Gather enough feathers to stuff a pillow that might give her aching neck some relief from the flat, lumpy thing she currently slept on each night. It was August of 1873, and Reno, Nevada was a town that hummed with the constant movement of miners, ranchers, railroad workers, and gamblers. Theodora had arrived 6 months earlier from Missouri, following the death of her parents to typhoid fever. At 21 years old, she found herself completely alone in the world, except for a distant cousin who had promised her work at the boarding house, but had failed to mention that the work was relentless, and the pay was barely enough to cover her tiny room under the eaves. She stood, brushing dust from her faded blue calico dress, and scanned the ground for more feathers. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat traced lines down her temples despite the bonnet she wore. A chicken squawked somewhere nearby, and Theodora moved toward the sound, hoping the birds might have left behind a few more feathers she could claim. That was when she heard the horse approaching, the steady clip-clop of hooves on the hard, packed earth of the street that ran behind the boarding house. Theodora glanced up, shading her eyes against the bright sky, and saw a tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against the sun. The rider slowed as he drew near, and she could make out more details. A broad-brimmed hat, dusty leather chaps, and a dark shirt rolled up at the sleeves despite the heat. "Afternoon, miss," the rider called, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised her. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. Theodora straightened, suddenly conscious of how she must look, kneeling in the dirt like some kind of scavenger. "Good afternoon," she replied, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. The cowboy dismounted with an easy grace, leading his horse closer. Now that he was on the ground, Theodora could see his face properly. He was young, perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and dust covered his clothes as though he had been riding for hours. "Forgive me for asking, but did you drop something? I saw you looking at the ground real intent," he said, genuine concern in his tone. Theodora felt foolish, but there was something about his open expression that made her answer honestly. "No, I have not lost anything. I am collecting feathers, actually." She opened her satchel slightly to show him the small collection inside. His eyebrows rose in interest rather than mockery. "Feathers? That is an unusual hobby." "Not a hobby," Theodora corrected, lifting her chin slightly. "I am making a pillow, or trying to, at least. The one I have now is hardly better than sleeping on the bare mattress." Understanding crossed his features, followed by something that looked like sympathy. "That is hard work, collecting enough feathers one by one. I imagine it would take quite a while." 3 months so far," Theodora admitted, "and I have perhaps enough for a child's pillow at best." The cowboy was silent for a moment, studying her with those dark eyes in a way that made Theodora's heart beat a little faster. There was no pity in his gaze, only thoughtfulness. "My name is Isaac Palmer," he said finally. "I work for the Double R Ranch about 15 miles north of here. Came into town for supplies." "Theodora Jenkins," she replied. "I work at the boarding house." She gestured toward the 2-story building behind her. Isaac nodded slowly, then seemed to come to some kind of decision. "Miss Jenkins, I know we have only just met and you have no reason to trust a stranger, but would you allow me to help you with your pillow problem?" Theodora blinked in surprise. Help me. How do you mean? The trading post on Virginia Street carries Goose down, Isaac said. Proper filling for a pillow. I was headed there anyway for my supplies, and it would be no trouble at all to purchase some for you. The offer was so unexpected and generous that Theodora found herself momentarily speechless. I could not possibly accept such a gift, she said when she found her voice. I do not even know you, and Goose Down must be expensive. It is not so expensive as all that, Isaac assured her, and I would not be making the offer if I did not mean it sincerely. No one should have to sleep without a decent pillow, especially when the solution is so simple. There was something in his earnest expression that made Theodora want to trust him. She had been in Reno long enough to know that not all men who spoke kindly had kind intentions. But Isaac Palmer did not have the calculating look she had learned to recognize in the gamblers and drifters who frequented the boarding house. His offer seemed to come from genuine compassion rather than any expectation of something in return. Why would you do this for a complete stranger? She asked, searching his face. Isaac smiled, and the expression transformed his features from handsome to truly striking. My mother used to say that kindness costs nothing but can mean everything to the person receiving it. She passed 3 years ago, and I like to think I honor her memory by helping where I can. Besides, he added, his tone lightening, you have been collecting feathers for 3 months. That kind of determination deserves to be rewarded. Theodora felt her resistance crumbling. The thought of finally having a proper pillow, of being able to sleep without waking with a stiff neck and aching shoulders, was almost too tempting to refuse. If you are certain it is no trouble, she said slowly. No trouble at all, Isaac confirmed. Wait here just a moment, I will be back before you know it. He swung back into his saddle with practiced ease and touched his hat brim again before turning his horse toward the main street. Theodora watched him ride away, her heart doing strange things in her chest. She told herself it was simply gratitude, nothing more, but there had been something about the way he looked at her that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in a very long time. True to his word, Isaac returned within half an hour. He carried a large paper-wrapped package tied with string, and his saddlebags bulged with other supplies. He dismounted and held the package out to Theodora with a smile that made her pulse quicken. Enough Goose Down for 2 good-sized pillows, he said. The trading post owner threw in some ticking fabric as well, said you would need it to make the cases. Theodora took the package, stunned by its weight and the reality of what Isaac had just done for her. How much do I owe you? She asked, though she knew with a sinking feeling that she could not possibly afford it, not with her meager wages. Not a single cent, Isaac said firmly. This is a gift, Miss Jenkins. I will not accept payment. But I cannot just take this from you, Theodora protested, even as her fingers tightened on the package. It is too much. Isaac stepped closer, and Theodora caught the scent of leather and sage and something else uniquely him. You can and you will, he said gently. Consider it a welcome to Reno, even if I am 6 months late in offering it. This town can be hard on newcomers, especially women on their own. If a bag of Goose Down makes your life a little easier, then I am glad to provide it. Theodora felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She had grown accustomed to managing on her own, to expecting nothing from anyone. This unexpected kindness threatened to crack the protective shell she had built around her heart. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You cannot know what this means to me. I think I might have some idea, Isaac replied. His eyes held hers for a long moment, and Theodora felt something shift between them, some unspoken connection that made the dusty yard behind the boarding house feel suddenly intimate, despite the open sky above them. The moment was broken by a voice calling from the back door of the boarding house. "Theodora, where have you gotten to? These beds will not make themselves." Theodora turned to see her cousin Margaret standing in the doorway, hands on her hips and a disapproving frown on her round face. "I must go," she said to Isaac, clutching the package to her chest. "Thank you again, truly. I will not forget your kindness." "Perhaps I might see you again sometime," Isaac said, a hopeful note in his voice. "I come to town for supplies every few weeks." "I would like that," Theodora said before she could stop herself. Then she was hurrying toward the boarding house, her heart racing and the precious package of Goose down held carefully in her arms. That night, after the dinner dishes were washed and put away and the boarders had retired to their rooms, Theodora sat in her tiny attic room with the package of Goose down spread before her by lamplight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she untied the string and peeled back the paper to reveal the soft, white down inside. It was more luxurious than anything she had owned in her entire life. The ticking fabric was sturdy and good quality, clearly not the cheapest option available. Isaac Palmer had spent more on this gift than he had let on, and the realization made Theodora's chest tighten with emotion. She thought about his kind eyes and warm smile, the way he had listened to her without judgment when she explained her feather collection. Most men in Reno barely looked at her except to order her around at the boarding house or to make crude suggestions she had learned to ignore. Isaac had treated her with respect and genuine interest, as though she were a person worthy of consideration rather than just another servant girl. Over the next 2 days, Theodora spent every spare moment sewing the pillow cases. Her stitches were small and neat, learned from her mother during long Missouri evenings that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. She worked by candlelight after her chores were finished, her eyes straining but her heart light with anticipation. When the pillows were finally complete, stuffed full of the soft goose down and stitched closed, Theodora could hardly believe they were real. She pressed her face into one of them experimentally, and almost laughed at how different it felt from the sad, lumpy thing she had been using. That night, she slept better than she had in months, her dreams unusually vivid and featuring a certain dark-eyed cowboy more prominently than she cared to admit. 2 weeks passed, and Theodora found herself thinking about Isaac Palmer far more than was probably appropriate for someone she had met only once. She caught herself looking up whenever she heard horses in the street, hoping to see his tall figure riding past. She replayed their conversation in her mind, analyzing every word and glance for meaning beyond simple kindness. She was hanging laundry in the yard one afternoon when she heard that now familiar voice call out, "Good afternoon, Miss Jenkins." Theodora spun around so quickly that she nearly dropped the wet sheet she was holding. Isaac sat astride his horse at the edge of the yard, and the smile on his face suggested he was pleased to have surprised her. "Mr. Palmer," she said, trying to keep her voice level even as joy bubbled up inside her. "I did not expect to see you again so soon. I finished my work early and decided to make the ride into town," Isaac said, dismounting. "I wanted to check whether the goose down served its purpose." "Were you able to make your pillows?" "I was, and they are wonderful," Theodora said, setting down her laundry basket. "I cannot thank you enough. I have been sleeping better than I have since I arrived in Nevada." Isaac's smile widened. "I am very glad to hear it. That makes the trip worthwhile all by itself." They stood looking at each other for a moment, and Theodora felt that same strange pull she had experienced during their first meeting. There was something about Isaac that made her want to know everything about him, to understand what had shaped him into the kind of man who would buy goose down for a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. "Would you like some water?" she asked, suddenly aware of how dusty and tired he looked. "You must have ridden a long way." "Water would be most welcome," Isaac agreed. Theodora led him to the pump behind the boarding house and worked the handle until clear, cool water gushed out. Isaac cupped his hands under the stream and drank deeply, then splashed some on his face and neck. Theodora found herself watching the water droplets slide down his throat and quickly looked away, feeling her cheeks heat. "I was hoping," Isaac said, wiping his face with his bandana, "that you might have some free time one of these days. I would like to show you some of the area outside town, if you would be interested. There are some beautiful spots in the hills that not many people know about." Theodora's heart leapt, but caution tempered her excitement. "Are you asking to court me, Mr. Palmer?" Isaac met her eyes directly. "I suppose I am, Miss Jenkins. I have thought about you quite a bit these past 2 weeks. I would very much like to get to know you better if you would allow it." The honest admission made Theodora's breath catch. No man had ever been so straightforward with her before. "I have Sunday afternoons free," she said, making her decision. "Margaret allows me 3 hours after the dinner cleanup is finished." "This Sunday, then?" Isaac asked hopefully. "This Sunday," Theodora confirmed, and the smile that broke across Isaac's face made her feel like she was standing in direct sunlight even though they were in the shade of the building. That Sunday, Theodora dressed in her best outfit, a green cotton dress that her mother had made her before the illness, with carefully mended lace at the collar and cuffs. She braided her dark blonde hair and pinned it up carefully, allowing a few soft tendrils to frame her face. When she looked at herself in the small, spotted mirror in her room, she barely recognized the hopeful woman staring back at her. Isaac arrived precisely when he said he would, riding a beautiful bay mare and leading a second, gentler horse behind him. He wore a clean shirt and had clearly made an effort to wash away the trail dust. His face lit up when he saw Theodora coming down the boarding house steps. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Theodora duck her head to hide her pleased smile. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." Isaac helped her into the saddle of the second horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. Theodora had learned to ride as a girl in Missouri, though it had been some time since she had the opportunity. The familiar feel of a horse beneath her and the open land ahead made something loosen in her chest that she had not realized was tight. They rode north out of Reno, following the Truckee River as it wound through the valley. Isaac pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the area, the best fishing spots, where wildcats sometimes sunned themselves on the rocks, which trails led up into the Sierra Nevada mountains that rose dramatically to the west. "How long have you been in Nevada?" Theodora asked as they let the horses pick their way along a narrow trail beside the water. 5 years now," Isaac said. "I came out from Pennsylvania after my father died. My mother had already passed, and there was nothing left for me there. I worked odd jobs for a while, then got hired on at the Double R Ranch. The owner, Robert Robertson, is a fair man and a good boss. He has taught me most of what I know about ranching." "Do you like the work?" Isaac considered the question. "I do. It is hard, and the hours are long, but there is something satisfying about it. Working with the cattle and horses, being outside, seeing the results of your labor. It is honest work, and it feels meaningful in a way that some jobs do not." They stopped in a small clearing where the river widened into a calm pool. Cottonwood trees provided dappled shade, and the sound of the water moving over stones was peaceful and hypnotic. Isaac spread a blanket he had brought and unpacked some simple food: bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of cold tea. "Tell me about Missouri," Isaac said as they ate. "What was your life like there?" Theodora had not talked about her past much since arriving in Reno. It was easier to focus on surviving each day than to dwell on everything she had lost. But something about Isaac's gentle attention made the words come easier. "My parents had a small farm," she began. "Nothing grand, but it was ours. My father grew corn and wheat, and my mother kept chickens and a large garden. I had one brother, but he died when I was 12. A farming accident." Even now, years later, the memory of Thomas brought a lump to her throat. "I am sorry," Isaac said quietly. Theodora nodded. "After that, it was just the three of us. My parents were good people, hardworking and kind. They taught me to read and write, which not everyone bothered with for their daughters. My mother especially believed that education was important." She smiled sadly. "She would have liked you, I think. You remind me of my father in some ways. He was always helping neighbors, even when we did not have much ourselves." "They sound like wonderful people. It must have been devastating to lose them both." "It was," Theodora admitted. "The typhoid fever swept through our county so quickly. One week they were fine, and the next they were both gone. The farm had to be sold to pay debts, and I had nowhere to go except to my mother's cousin here in Reno. Margaret is not unkind exactly, but she is not warm either. She sees me as cheap labor more than family." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Does she treat you poorly?" "If she does—" "No, nothing like that," Theodora assured him. "She works me hard, but she pays me, and I have a room and meals. It is more than many women in my situation can claim. But it is lonely sometimes." She had not meant to admit that last part, but once the words were out, she could not take them back. Isaac reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You do not have to be lonely anymore," he said softly. "Not if you do not want to be." Theodora's breath caught at the implication in his words. They had known each other such a short time, and yet she felt connected to him in a way that defied logic. Perhaps it was because they were both orphans, both finding their way in this hard land without family to lean on. Or perhaps it was something deeper, some recognition that passed between souls who were meant to find each other. "I would like that very much," she whispered. They sat in the clearing for the remainder of the afternoon, talking about everything and nothing. Isaac told her funny stories about life on the ranch, about ornery cows and horses with distinct personalities. Theodora shared memories of Missouri, the good ones that did not hurt so much to remember. They discussed books they had read and places they dreamed of seeing someday. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Isaac reluctantly said they should head back. He helped Theodora to her feet, and for a moment they stood very close, his hand still holding hers. Theodora could see gold flecks in his dark eyes and the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to meet hers. "May I see you again next Sunday?" he asked, his voice slightly rough. "Yes," Theodora said. "Please." The ride back to Reno seemed shorter than the ride out had been. When they reached the boarding house, Isaac helped Theodora down from her horse and held her just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," she said. "It was perfect." "The first of many, I hope," Isaac replied. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, never breaking eye contact. "Until next week, Miss Jenkins." Theodora floated up the stairs to her attic room, her heart so full she thought it might burst. That night, she pressed her face into one of the pillows Isaac had made possible, and allowed herself to imagine a future that included more days like today, more moments of connection and joy with a man who seemed to genuinely care about her. The following weeks established a pattern that Theodora came to cherish. Every Sunday, Isaac would arrive at the boarding house, and they would spend the afternoon together. Sometimes they rode out into the countryside. Other times they walked through Reno, and Isaac bought her penny candy from the general store or ribbons for her hair. Once, they attended a town social together, and Theodora danced for the first time since leaving Missouri, her hand clasped in Isaac's as they whirled across the floor. With each passing week, Theodora felt herself falling deeper in love. Isaac was everything she could have wanted in a man: kind, honest, hardworking, and considerate. He made her laugh with his dry humor and listened intently when she talked about her dreams and fears. He never pressured her for more than she was ready to give, content to court her properly and patiently. For his part, Isaac was clearly equally smitten. Theodora caught him watching her with an expression of such tender affection that it made her chest ache. He brought her small gifts: wildflowers picked on his rides, a book of poetry he thought she would enjoy, a pretty stone shaped like a heart. Once, he arrived with a jar of honey from a neighbor's bees, remembering that she had mentioned missing the honey her mother used to harvest back in Missouri. It was October, 2 months after their first meeting, when Isaac arrived at the boarding house looking more serious than usual. Theodora felt a flutter of nervousness as she met him in the front parlor, where Margaret reluctantly allowed them to sit chaperoned by the open door and the other boarders passing by. "Is something wrong?" Theodora asked, searching his face. Isaac took her hands in his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her knuckles. "Nothing is wrong. In fact, I hope very much that things are about to be very right. Theodora, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. I wake up thinking about you and fall asleep with you in my thoughts. You are the last thing I want to see at night and the first thing I want to see in the morning." Theodora's heart began to pound so hard she was sure Isaac could hear it. "I know I do not have much to offer," Isaac continued. "I am just a ranch hand with modest savings and no family name to speak of. But I work hard, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy if you will let me. Theodora Jenkins, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Theodora's cheeks before she could stop them. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." Isaac's whoop of joy echoed through the boarding house, and suddenly he was pulling her to her feet and spinning her around. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time, a sweet, tender kiss that tasted of promise and hope. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Theodora saw that Isaac's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret this," he vowed. "I could never regret it," Theodora assured him. "You saved me, Isaac, not just with the goose down, but in every way a person can be saved." They set the wedding date for mid-November, giving them 6 weeks to prepare. It would be a simple ceremony at the church in Reno, with a small reception afterward. Margaret agreed to let Theodora sew a dress using fabric Isaac purchased from the trading post, a beautiful deep blue wool that would serve her well in the Nevada winters. Isaac spoke to Robert Robertson about his upcoming marriage, and the ranch owner surprised them both by offering Isaac a small cabin on the ranch property. It needed some repair work, but it would be theirs, a real home to start their life together. Isaac spent every spare moment fixing up the cabin, replacing rotted boards and patching the roof. When Theodora was finally able to visit a week before the wedding, she found a cozy 2-room structure with a stone fireplace, real glass windows, and a beautiful wooden bed frame that Isaac had built himself. "It is not much," Isaac said anxiously, watching her face. "It is perfect," Theodora said, meaning every word. After months in a cramped attic room, this cabin felt like a palace. More importantly, it would be theirs, a place where they could build a life together. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, the November air crisp with the promise of winter. Theodora dressed with trembling hands, her heart full of joy and nerves and anticipation. Margaret helped her with the buttons on her dress, and for once her cousin's expression was almost soft. "You have done well for yourself," Margaret said, which was perhaps the kindest thing she had ever said to Theodora. "Isaac Palmer is a good man, better than most you might have found in this town." "I know," Theodora said. "I am very lucky." "Not lucky," Margaret corrected. "Sometimes the right people find each other at the right time. Now come, we do not want to be late to your own wedding." The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Theodora walked down the aisle of the small church to where Isaac stood waiting, looking handsome in a new suit he had purchased for the occasion. His eyes never left her face, and the love shining in them made Theodora feel like the most precious woman in the world. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through all the days ahead. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food contributed by various townspeople who had come to know and respect the young couple. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Theodora felt surrounded by more warmth and goodwill than she had experienced since losing her parents. Perhaps she had found a new kind of family here after all, built from friends and community rather than blood. As the evening wound down, Isaac helped Theodora into the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion. They rode out to the Double R Ranch under a sky full of stars. Theodora snuggled against Isaac's side with a blanket wrapped around them both against the chill. The cabin was warm when they arrived, a fire already crackling in the fireplace thanks to one of Isaac's fellow ranch hands. Someone had also left a pot of stew warming on the hearth and a loaf of fresh bread on the table. Isaac carried Theodora over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the center of their new home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Palmer," Isaac said softly. "Home," Theodora repeated, and the word had never sounded so beautiful. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left Theodora feeling cherished and desired in equal measure. Isaac treated her like she was made of spun glass, checking constantly that she was comfortable, that he was not hurting her. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed he had built, Theodora's head on Isaac's chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I love you," Isaac murmured into her hair. "I loved you from the moment I saw you kneeling in that dusty yard, collecting feathers with such determination." "I love you too," Theodora said. "You gave me more than just Goose down that day. You gave me hope that life could be good again." The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Theodora learned the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn to make breakfast for Isaac before he headed out for the day's work. She kept their little cabin spotless and cooked hearty meals to fuel Isaac's long hours. On Sundays, they would sometimes ride out to their spot by the river, bundled against the winter cold, and talk about their dreams for the future. Isaac proved to be everything Theodora had hoped for in a husband. He was patient with her as she learned to manage a household, never criticizing when she burned the biscuits or forgot to bring in enough firewood. In the evenings, he would read to her from books borrowed from the ranch library, or they would play cards by the fireplace. At night, he held her close and made love to her with a reverence that never faded, no matter how familiar they became with each other's bodies. Winter gave way to spring, and Theodora discovered she was pregnant. The realization came one morning when she found herself unable to keep down breakfast, a pattern that continued for several days. When she confided her suspicions to Isaac, he went very still, and then gathered her into his arms with such fierce joy that she could barely breathe. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Theodora was sick almost constantly for the first 3 months, able to keep down little more than weak tea and dry toast. Isaac worried himself nearly to distraction, hovering over her and trying to tempt her with different foods. But as she moved into her 4th month, the sickness finally eased, replaced by a ravenous appetite and a growing belly that delighted them both. Isaac became even more protective, insisting Theodora rest more and work less. He took over many of the household chores despite his long days with the cattle, determined that she should not strain herself. At night, he would talk to her belly, telling their unborn child stories and promising to be the best father he could possibly be. "What do you hope for, a boy or a girl?" Theodora asked one evening as they lay in bed, Isaac's hand spread across her swollen stomach. "I do not care one bit, as long as the baby is healthy and you come through the birth safely," Isaac said firmly. "Though I confess I would not mind a son to teach everything I know about horses and cattle. And if it is a girl," Isaac smiled, "then I will teach her anyway, and she will be the finest horsewoman in Nevada. Our children will know they can be anything they want to be, regardless of whether they are born male or female." Theodora felt a rush of love for this man who saw the world with such an open heart. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I hope so," Isaac said seriously. "I want to be the kind of father my own father was to me before the illness took him. Strong but gentle, firm but fair. I want our children to always know they are loved." As autumn arrived again, bringing Theodora's due date closer, Isaac became increasingly anxious. He arranged for the ranch owner's wife, Mrs. Robertson, to be present for the birth, along with the doctor from Reno. He stockpiled supplies and prepared everything he could think of to make Theodora comfortable. The labor began on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year and 2 months after the day Isaac had first seen Theodora collecting feathers. The contractions started mild but grew steadily stronger as the day progressed. Isaac stayed by Theodora's side through all of it, holding her hand and whispering encouragement even as his face grew pale with worry. The birth was long and difficult, lasting well into the night. There were moments when Theodora was certain she could not continue, when the pain seemed too much to bear. But Isaac never left her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of labor. Mrs. Robertson and the doctor worked efficiently, guiding Theodora through each contraction. Finally, in the early hours before dawn, a baby's cry split the air. Theodora collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure but filled with overwhelming relief and joy. "A boy," the doctor announced. "A strong, healthy boy." Isaac's face crumpled, and tears streamed openly down his cheeks as the doctor placed their son in Theodora's arms. The baby was red-faced and squalling, his tiny fists waving in the air, and he was the most beautiful thing Theodora had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his downy head with a trembling finger. "We have been waiting for you." They named him Thomas after Theodora's lost brother, with the middle name of Robert in honor of the ranch owner who had been so kind to them. Baby Thomas was a healthy, happy infant who seemed to delight in the world from his very first days. Isaac proved to be every bit the devoted father Theodora had known he would be, spending hours simply holding his son and staring at him in wonder. The ranch community embraced the new family warmly. Mrs. Robertson brought over meals during Theodora's recovery and taught her tricks for soothing a fussy baby. The ranch hands took turns stopping by to congratulate the new parents and to slip little carved toys into Thomas's crib. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Theodora and Isaac's love for each other only deepened. They worked as a team, supporting each other through the challenges of parenthood and celebrating each milestone together. Thomas's first smile, his first word, his first wobbly steps, each moment was precious and shared. When Thomas was 2 years old, Theodora discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Isaac was no less worried or protective, but he had more confidence now, having been through it once before. Their daughter arrived in the spring, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of their cabin. The labor was shorter this time, only 6 hours, and when the midwife placed the baby girl in Theodora's arms, she felt complete in a way she had not known was possible. "She is perfect," Isaac breathed, touching his daughter's tiny hand with one finger. "What should we name her?" "I was thinking Margaret," Theodora said, glancing at Isaac to gauge his reaction. "Despite everything, my cousin did take me in when I had nowhere else to go. Without her, I would never have been in Reno that day you found me collecting feathers." Isaac smiled and pressed a kiss to Theodora's sweaty forehead. "Margaret Palmer. I think it suits her. And you are right, we owe your cousin a debt of gratitude, even if she did work you too hard." Little Margaret proved to have a very different temperament from her older brother. Where Thomas was easygoing and cheerful, Margaret was intense and determined, demanding attention from the moment she entered the world. She was also fearless, crawling earlier than Thomas had, and getting into everything she could reach. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. Isaac was promoted to foreman of the Double R Ranch, a position that came with more responsibility but also better pay and respect. They were able to add a room onto their cabin, giving the children their own space and themselves a bit more privacy. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, kind boy who loved helping his father with the horses. He had inherited Isaac's steady nature and Theodora's quick mind, and he was clever with his hands, able to fix almost anything that broke around the ranch. Margaret was a whirlwind of energy, equally at home playing with dolls or helping her brother mend fences. She had her father's determination and her mother's fierce independence. When Thomas was 8 and Margaret was 6, Theodora gave birth to their third child, another boy they named James. And 2 years after that, their final child arrived, a girl they named Sarah. The cabin was full and noisy and chaotic, but Theodora would not have changed a single thing about her life. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were finally asleep, Isaac would pull Theodora into his arms and hold her close. "Do you remember that day I found you collecting feathers?" he would ask, a smile in his voice. "I remember thinking you were either very kind or very foolish, spending your money on Goose down for a stranger," Theodora would reply, the familiar exchange a comfort between them. "Best money I ever spent," Isaac would say. "It brought me you and you brought me everything else." And Theodora would lean into her husband's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of him, and silently thank whatever force had brought Isaac Palmer riding past the boarding house on that hot August afternoon so many years ago. The children grew steadily, each year bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas showed a natural talent for working with horses, able to calm even the most skittish animals with his gentle manner. By the time he was 14, he was working alongside Isaac at the ranch, learning everything his father could teach him about managing cattle and horses. Margaret developed a love of learning that surprised everyone. She would ride into Reno whenever she could to visit the small library that had opened in the town, bringing home books on every subject imaginable. She dreamed of becoming a teacher someday, of opening a school where children could learn regardless of their family's ability to pay. James and Sarah, being younger, were still finding their paths, but they were bright, happy children who adored their older siblings and parents. The family faced the usual trials. Illnesses that sent them all into panics until fevers broke, harsh winters when supplies ran low, dry summers when water was scarce and tempers could run short. Through it all, Isaac and Theodora's partnership never wavered. They had built their marriage on a foundation of mutual respect, honest communication, and deep affection that had only grown stronger with time. They still made time for each other despite the demands of 4 children, stealing quiet moments on the porch after the kids were asleep or rising early to watch the sunrise together before the day's work began. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Theodora by taking her back to the clearing by the river where they had shared their first Sunday afternoon together. The cottonwood trees had grown taller, and the river still sang its eternal song over the stones. They spread a blanket in the same spot and ate bread and cheese, just as they had a decade before. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked, watching Theodora's face in the dappled sunlight. "Marrying a ranch hand and living this hard life, you could have found someone with more to offer." Theodora looked at him in genuine surprise. "Regret it? Isaac, you gave me everything I could have dreamed of and more. A home, a family, love that sustains me through every day. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Isaac said. "That has always been my greatest goal." "I am happy," Theodora assured him. "More than I ever thought possible after I lost my parents. You took a broken, lonely girl and showed her how to live again. You gave me not just Goose down for a pillow, but comfort and safety and love. Every morning I wake up grateful that you happened to ride past that boarding house 10 years ago." Isaac pulled her close and kissed her deeply, and for a moment they were not parents or workers or responsible adults, but simply 2 people who loved each other with their whole hearts. As their children entered their teenage years, Isaac and Theodora began to plan for the future. Thomas made it clear that he wanted to continue working in ranching, perhaps even starting his own operation someday. Isaac had been saving money carefully, and he began looking into purchasing a small piece of land where Thomas could eventually establish himself. Margaret at 16 was as determined as ever to become